The galaxy lay beneath a shroud of silence. Once, its stars had burned with the fierce light of 1,000 empires, each a beacon to the hopeful and the hungry. Now, they flickered like dying embers in a hearth long abandoned, their light struggling against the creeping darkness that gnawed at the edges of all things. Whole systems had fallen into shadow, their names erased from imperial charts, their histories devoured by the ceaseless march of time and war. And in the far reaches of the segmentum obscurus, beneath the pale glare of Fenris's twin moons, the space wolves stood as they had for 10 millennia, unyielding, unbroken, but no longer unscarred. The victory at Halvorn Reach should have been a song of triumph, a feast in the halls of the Fang that would echo for centuries. Instead, it had been a hollow thing, a pyre of shattered ships and dead brothers. Their enemies lay broken, yes, but so too did something within the wolves themselves. The taste of the battle's end was ash upon the tongue. It was here that our tale begins, not in the rising glory of an empire, but in its slow, quiet erosion. And as you listen to these words, know this: we truly love and care for you. You are as much a part of this saga as the warriors who bled upon the snow. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The ice winds roared across the shattered battlements of Crakefjord's fortress, carrying with them the scent of salt and iron. Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang stood at the parapet, the wind teasing strands of frost from his mane of grey hair. His armour, a patchwork of fresh repair and ancient scars, bore the runes of countless campaigns. He did not watch the sea, though its black waves hammered endlessly against the ice cliffs below. His eyes were on the sky. Harrick had fought for the Imperium across 1,000 light years, in cities of glass and smoke, in jungles that dripped with venom, on moons where the very air had been poison. He had bled for its banners, lost brothers to its wars, and carried out its decrees without hesitation. And yet, as the storms passed over Fenris, he could not banish the thought that had taken root in his mind since Halvorn Reach. We are not what we were meant to be. The victory there had come at a cost the Imperium did not speak of. It was not the enemy that had taken the most from them, but the allies who had ordered the wolves into the killing fields, knowing they would be cut down to the last. The High Lords of Terror had called it necessary attrition. Harrick called it betrayal. A howl rose from the distant fjords, deep and mournful. It rolled through the icebound valleys like an echo of some ancient grief. Below him, the wolf guard stood in quiet ranks, their breath steaming in the cold. Beyond them, thralls worked in silence to carve the names of the dead into the stone wall of remembrance. There was no feasting this night, no songs. The victory was one the wolves could not celebrate. "Still brooding, my Jarl?" The voice came from his left, deep, weathered, edged with wry humour. Rune Priest Skjolder. One Eye approached, his fur-lined cloak snapping in the wind. The runes carved into the haft of his staff glimmered faintly, as if catching some unseen light. Harrick gave a grunt. "Brooding, Skjolder? A wolf without thought is a cur, and I have much to think on." The rune priest came to stand beside him. Together, they watched the storm clouds mass on the horizon. "I read the winds before I came," Skjolder said. "They speak of changes on the galactic currents, the kind that bend the course of empires." Harrick's gaze narrowed. "And what did they whisper to you?" "That the Imperium will ask something of you soon, something you will not wish to give." Before Harrick could answer, the deep clang of the Fang's war bells rolled through the frozen air. A thrall came running across the parapet, clutching a data slate. His breath came in ragged bursts, his eyes wide as he dropped to one knee before the Wolf Lord. From Terra, my Jarl, sealed orders, the sigil of the High Lords. Harrick took the slate without a word. The seal broke beneath his thumb, the golden aquila cracking down the middle. His eyes scanned the message once, twice. He could feel Skjolda's gaze on him, sharp and searching. "Well?" the rune priest asked. "They summoned me to Terra," Harrick said, voice flat. "No reason given." "Then there is reason enough to worry," Skjolda muttered. Harrick's mind churned. A summons to Terra was rare for a Wolf Lord. Rarer still, without explanation. It could mean honor. It could mean judgment. It could mean the noose. The last time such a summons had been issued, it had ended in the burning of Prospero and the shattering of a brotherhood. A memory surfaced of Leman Russ himself, grim-eyed upon his throne, speaking to his sons in the days before that fateful war. "We are wolves, not lapdogs. Remember that when Terra calls." The wind rose, carrying with it the distant thunderous crack of ice breaking in the fjords. Harrick turned away from the parapet, his decision already made. "Ready my ship," he said to the thrall. "We leave for Terra at first light." Skjolda stepped forward. "You go without knowing why?" "I go because I must," Harrick said. "If I refuse, they will send another with chains. Better to walk into the wolf's den with my head high than be dragged." The rune priest's single eye studied him, the faint glow of psychic sight flickering in its depths. "Then take your guard. The journey will not be without danger." Harrick allowed himself a thin smile. "Danger is the one constant I trust." As the thrall ran to carry out his orders, Harrick looked once more toward the storm front on the horizon. It seemed darker now, heavier. There was a scent in the wind. Not just snow and salt, but something older, stranger. He could not name it, but it brought with it a memory from his youth, of standing on the ice as a boy and feeling the tremor of something vast moving deep beneath the frozen seas. A presence that had watched him, unseen, waiting. Harrick Icefang did not believe in omens, but as the first flakes of the storm began to fall, he could not shake the feeling that whatever awaited him on Terra would not be the end of his journey, only the first step toward a fate that would strip bare the bones of loyalty, honor, and the Imperium itself. And somewhere, in the howling wind, he thought he heard a voice, low, feral, and patient, as if the ice itself were whispering, "Soon." The halls of the Fang were carved from the bones of mountains and the frozen breath of ancient gods. Torchlight glimmered against ice-veined stone, casting long shadows that shifted like prowling beasts. It was here, in the great hall of heroes, that Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang gathered his sworn pack before the long journey to Terra. The oaken doors groaned open, and warriors filed in, massive, broad-shouldered, their pelts and armor bearing the weight of centuries. Each bore a weapon forged in the volcanic forges of Fenris, etched with runes that told the tales of their victories. But this was no feast. No laughter rang through the rafters. The air was heavy with a silence that seemed to listen. Rune priest Skjolda stood at Harrick's side, his single eye glimmering faintly in the gloom. Beside them, Iron Priest Bori Stonehand inspected a servo arm, its polished claws glinting in the firelight. Bori was a bear of a man, his flesh and metal frame smelling faintly of machine oil and ozone. He had been with Harrick since their first campaign together, and though his loyalty had never faltered, his silence tonight was a weight in itself. Harrick's gaze swept the room, resting last upon the youngest among them, Jorin Thrice Bitten, Barely a century in the chapter's service, Jorin was the embodiment of Fenrisian ferocity, hungry, proud, and quick to bare his fangs. His wolf pelt was still rich with colour, its furs not yet dulled by the years, his eyes bright with an eagerness that made Harrick think of his own youth. "We go to Terra," Harrick said, his voice carrying the weight of the decision. "Summoned by the High Lords themselves." The silence broke into murmurs, low and sharp-edged. Skjolder raised his staff, and the runes along its length glowed faintly, quieting the noise. "This is no honor quest," Bori said gruffly, the metal of his jaw clicking faintly as he spoke. "No Wolf Lord is called to Terra without cause, because we are not told." Harrick inclined his head. "Aye, which is why we go prepared for truth and for lies. There are those in the halls of Terra who see the wolves not as brothers, but as beasts to be muzzled. I will not walk into their den without teeth at my side." Jorin stepped forward, his voice sharp with the zeal of youth. "Then why not take the whole great company? Let the High Lord see that we are not to be summoned like thralls." The older wolves shifted uneasily. Bori gave a grunt that could have been a laugh or a growl. "Because, pup, marching an army into the heart of the Imperium is a fine way to find your name burned from its records." Skjolder's single eye fixed on Jorin, and because some battles are fought with words sharper than blades. Jorin's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. Still, Harrick saw the flicker in the young warrior's gaze, a spark of ambition, the belief that he could prove himself greater than the elders if given the chance. They spoke of the journey ahead, warp routes, supply caches, potential rendezvous points if the fleet was scattered. The Fang's star map shimmered in the air above the table, constellations shifting with the movement of the galaxy's great wheels. But beneath the strategy, unspoken questions gnawed at them all. When the council ended, the wolves dispersed to make their preparations. Harrick remained behind, his hands braced against the edge of the table. The star maps faded, leaving him in shadow. "You're uneasy," Skjolder said quietly. Harrick gave a humorless laugh. "I am a wolf lord summoned by unseen masters to a place where every shadow hides a blade. Of course I am uneasy." Skjolder's eye narrowed. "Number. It is more than that. Your heart is not at ease with the Imperium itself." The word struck harder than Harrick expected. He thought of Halvan Reach, of the brothers left behind so that others might claim glory. He thought of the High Lord's orders, delivered without care for the cost in blood. He thought of Leman Russ, who had walked away from Terra and never returned. "The Imperium I fight for," Harrick said slowly, "is not the one they rule from their thrones. I fight for the people who cannot defend themselves, for the memory of Russ, for Fenris, not for the High Lord's pride." Skjolder nodded once, as though that was the answer he had expected and feared. "Then keep your teeth bared, my Jarl. The wolves of Terra are not our kin." The days before departure passed in a blur of preparation. The great hangars of the Fang echoed with the roar of Thunderhawk engines, the clatter of armour being fitted, the deep hymns of the Iron Priests as they blessed the machines. Servitors moved like shadows between the gunmetal hulls of the strike cruisers, their mechanical limbs busy with the sacred rites of ignition. Harrick's flagship, the Stormfang's Wrath, loomed above them all, its prow carved into the snarling head of a great wolf. Its runes burned with a cold blue light, and the shields along its hull shimmered faintly, alive with the pulse of the ship's ancient machine spirit. On the final night, as Fenris's twin moons rose high above the mountains, Harrick walked alone to the edge of the ice sea. The wind carried the sharp bite of salt and snow, and the auroras danced above like ribbons of green fire. Here, away from the noise of the fang, he could almost hear the heartbeat of the world beneath the ice. He remembered standing here as a boy, before the All-Father's wolves had claimed him. His father had told him the oldest tale of Fenris, that deep beneath the frozen seas lay the first wolf, the great beast from which all their kind had come. It slept, waiting for the day it would rise again to defend the world. Harrick wondered if it had stirred in recent years, restless as the Imperium's grasp tightened. He wondered, too, if he was walking toward his own awakening, or his own burial. At dawn, the wolves boarded their ships. The fang's bells tolled a slow farewell, each peal heavy with the weight of tradition. Jorin strode ahead of the others, his wolf pelt catching the light, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if already seeing the spires of terror. Bori checked the last runes on the Stormfang's Wrath's engines, muttering blessings half to the machine and half to himself. Shoulder walked at Harrick's side, staff in hand, his gaze distant, as though listening to something beyond mortal hearing. As the fleet's engines roared to life, Harrick felt the rumble through his boots. He looked one last time at the mountains of Fenris, their peaks lost in the morning mist. He had left this world countless times before, but never with such a weight upon his chest. The Stormfang's wrath rose into the storm clouds, and the fleet followed. Lightning flashed across the sky, the auroras burning briefly before fading into darkness. The void awaited them, cold, silent, and vast. And somewhere within that silence, Harrick knew, answers waited. Whether they would bring peace or ruin, he could not yet tell. But the course was set, and the wolves were already running. The night over Cadia had always been alive. Even before the world's last hours, the Cadian sky had been a map of defiance, a tapestry of watchful constellations, the auroras rippling in colours only those born beneath the gate could name. The stars had been constant sentinels, a reminder that while the eye of terror bled into reality, the Imperium's light still shone back. Now there were no stars, only a shrouded firmament, choked in black smoke and warp lightning. The heavens had been erased by the siege, each hour replacing the familiar constellations with the cold flicker of orbital fires, the slow, dying arcs of falling ships. The void above was a pyre, not of glory, but of desperation. Colonel Vara stood upon the western bastion of Kasr Merak, his battered breastplate still dusted in the masonry of a collapsed wall. His regiment, what remained of it, moved below him like shadows between shattered habs, scavenging ammunition from the dead and collecting the wounded in hushed, reverent silence. They did not cry out. They had long since learned that the enemy heard grief as keenly as gunfire. The wind carried a smell that was neither smoke nor blood, but something older, heavier, the scent of the warp bleeding through the veil. Varus knew it well. It was the same he had smelled in the ruins of other worlds that had once stood against the eye and failed. From the bastion's vantage point, he could see the distant green flare of a macro battery firing into orbit. It would not fire again. The Cadian defense grid had been gutted. Every shot now was a last act of vengeance, a refusal to surrender the void entirely. Behind him, Commissar Kalen approached, his greatcoat swaying in the bitter wind. "They're gathering for the night march," Kalen said, his voice flat, yet carrying that undertone that all Cadians recognized, the cold resolve of a man who knew the end, but would walk toward it without falter. Varus did not turn. "How many?" he asked. Kalen's silence was answer enough. The Ghost March had begun to earn its name not through tradition, but attrition. Each night, fewer boots struck the ground. Fewer voices answered roll call. The regiment had stopped burying its dead. There was no time and no soil untouched by enemy shells. Instead, they marched with the memory of those who had fallen, each soldier carrying the weight of ghosts upon their shoulders. As the order was given, the regiment moved, not in the tight, crisp lines of parade ground precision, but in the drifting, silent formation of hunters in enemy territory. Bayonets were fixed not for honor, but because they could not rely on ammunition alone. The lasguns they carried hummed faintly, their charge packs rationed like water in a desert. They marched through streets that no longer had names, their landmarks erased by bombardment. Here, a manufactorum where Varus had once inspected drills was now a skeletal husk, its walls crawling with shadows that moved against the wind. There, a statue of St. Gertrude of the Gate lay broken, her bronze eyes gouged out, her sword melted into slag. The enemy did not come in force tonight. That was worse. When the traitor Astartes came, they came to kill. When the warp spawn came, they came to unmake. But tonight, the silence carried a different weight, as if something in the void above was watching, waiting for the march to end. Hours into the night, the column reached the ruin of Casa Alaric, where they would rest, if such a word still held meaning. No tents were raised, no fires lit. The ghost march simply folded into the ruins, each soldier finding their own corner of rubble to collapse behind. Varus remained awake, his eyes fixed on the sky where the stars should have been. Somewhere above that smoke, beyond the void, beyond the madness of the eye, was terror. Was the Emperor. Was the reason Cadia still fought. But without the stars, he could not tell if he still faced the right direction. The silence was broken only once that night, not by shells, nor by screams, but by the distant sound of a single horn, carried on the wind. It was not of Imperial make. Its tone was low, deep and resonant, with a malice that felt older than the walls of Cadia itself. Kalen appeared again at Varus's side. "It's begun," the commissar said simply. Varus did not ask what. In the heart of every Cadian, the truth was already known. When dawn came, if dawn could still be called that under a starless sky, the ghost march rose again, and the black heavens watched, silent and unblinking. The dusk of the dying age settled upon the marble spires of the imperial palace. The sun bled itself into the horizon, a molten smear across the bruised sky, while below the avenues were lined with silent watchers, citizens who had forgotten whether they were waiting for hope or mourning its corpse. It was here, in the shadowed hall of petitioners, that Lord Valerius knelt before the golden throne, not to worship, but to bargain. The air was thick with incense and the faint hum of machinery that had been ancient when the first stones of the palace were set. The emperor's mortal attendants stood like statues along the walls, their faces pale beneath hoods, their eyes downcast. Between them, the throne loomed, a shape both divine and monstrous, wires and tubing like veins of steel, pulsing faintly as if the machine itself drew breath. Valerius did not look directly upon the emperor's form. Few dared, and fewer still returned unchanged. Instead, he spoke to the silence, knowing it was always listening. "My liege," his voice was low, but the cavernous hall carried every syllable. "The walls of our dominion grow thinner with each passing season. The outer marches burn. The fleets cannot be everywhere. The legions bleed faster than they are replaced. If we do not act, the end will not come as thunder. It will come as the long sigh of a world that simply forgets us." The silence answered, not with words, but with a weight, an invisible pressure that coiled around his mind like a serpent. It was the Emperor's will, felt rather than heard, as old as the stars and colder than the void. Then bring me what I require. The words were not words. They were a command carved directly into his thoughts, unblinking and absolute. Valerius bowed his head, his breath shallow. What is it you desire, my lord? 1,000 images flared in his skull. Images of ancient relics buried in worlds long abandoned, of vaults sealed before the First Empire rose, of names that had not been spoken since the galaxy was young, and among them, the face of a woman he had not seen in 20 years. She had been his rival once. Now she was the only one who could lead him to what the Emperor sought. You would have me consort with her, Valerius whispered. She has defied the throne. She has shed the blood of its servants. The weight in his mind shifted, heavy and inescapable. She has what I need, and so you will bring her to me. A chill passed through him. The Emperor did not speak in possibilities or choices. There was only command and obedience. He bowed lower until his forehead touched the cold, inlaid stone. It will be done. When he left the hall, the sky had darkened fully, and the wind that swept through the palace courtyard smelled of rain and iron. Valerius's aides waited with questions in their eyes, but he spoke none of the task laid upon him. Some truths, once spoken aloud, had a way of drawing unwanted ears. In the privacy of his chamber, he unfurled a star chart older than the palace itself. His finger traced a path through forbidden sectors, past the bones of dead systems, until it came to rest on a single world, a place erased from official maps, yet whispered of in the archives of the Obsidian Order. It was there that she would be. It was there that he would either secure the salvation of the Empire or its final betrayal. Outside, the storm broke, and the city trembled under the first peals of thunder. The bargain had been struck, though no oath had been sworn, and as Valerius began to prepare for the journey, he knew one truth above all. When the Emperor asked for something, the galaxy itself would bend to provide it, or break trying. The fortress world of Kelvar burned beneath a sky split by fire. From the vantage of the shattered citadel wall, one could see the ruins stretch far beyond the horizon. The once gilded spires now charred black, their skeletal remains clawing upward as if in supplication to the cold stars above. The void hung heavy, a mute witness to the murder of a civilization. The Emperor's banners still clung to the wind, though tattered, their edges glowing in the light of distant explosions. They did not fall. They refused to fall. But beneath them lay the broken bodies of those who had sworn to keep them aloft. The dead of Kelvar, soldiers, priests, children, were scattered like discarded relics of a forgotten faith. Captain Girath moved among the wreckage, his boots crunching over glass and bone. He carried no torch. The fires of war lit his path well enough. In his hand, his chainsword hung limp, its teeth clogged with blood and ash, as if the weapon itself had grown weary. His armor, once a polished plate of imperial gold, was now dulled and pitted, its purity seals torn away in the fury of the siege. The seals had burned, and with them the certainty of victory. Beside him walked Inquisitor Vera, her black coat marked with rents from shrapnel, her face unreadable save for the flicker of cold calculation in her eyes. She carried the Lex Ultima, the Emperor's final decree to worlds on the brink. Surrender to the Imperium's justice, or perish utterly. Kelvar had chosen the latter, though Jorath wondered if it had ever been a choice at all. We gave them every chance, Vera said at last, her voice low but certain. They spat on the Emperor's light. This is mercy. Jorath looked at the ruins, at the corpses of children clutched in the arms of their mothers. Mercy, he repeated, though the word tasted of iron and grief. In truth, Kelvar's rebellion had not been born of heresy or corruption. It had been born of fear. Fear of tithe quotas that stripped the world of its grain. Fear of conscription that emptied villages of their sons. The enemy that broke them was not Xenos nor demon, but the cold arithmetic of an empire stretched too far. But such truths had no place in the catechisms of war. The Inquisition's orders were clear. Rebellion, in all its forms, was rot, and rot must be excised. The wind carried a sound, a low thrumming pulse, and both turned their gaze upward. From the blackened heavens, the vast silhouette of an Imperial battleship drifted into view, its prows adorned with the screaming skulls of victory. The grief of Solace had come to finish what the ground forces had begun. Through the Vox, the order came. One word, nothing more. Exterminatus. Jorath felt something inside him give way. This was no siege now, no campaign. This was obliteration. Every stone, every face, every voice of Kelvar would be swept from history as if it had never been. Do you believe, he asked Vera quietly, that the Emperor still hears them? The Inquisitor did not answer. She merely signalled the fleet, her hand steady as she delivered the death sentence. The night turned white. A scream, not from any throat, but from the very bones of the world, split the air. The bombardment tore into Kelvar's mantle, boiling oceans and ripping mountains into dust. The capital's spires dissolved in the glare, their shadows burnt into the ground for a heartbeat before even that was gone. Jorath stood unmoving, the heat washing over him, the wind screaming past in cyclonic fury. In that moment, he imagined the faces of the dead rising through the firestorm, not as vengeful shades, but as silent witnesses to their own erasure. When the light faded, there was nothing. No spires, no banners, no Kelvar. Only the blackened crust of a dead rock adrift in the void. The Vox crackled again, delivering the Inquisition's closing seal. World purged. Resistance ended. Glory to the Emperor. Vera turned to leave. Jorath remained staring into the ashes. For the first time in his service, the words came to him unbidden, quiet, and without conviction. Glory to the Emperor. But the silence that followed felt heavier than any answer. The cold stars above Fenris had watched more betrayals than any living soul dared remember. Their pale light spilled over endless tundras, frozen fjords, and the jagged spires of the Fang. Yet on this night, beneath the bitter wind and swirling snow, an even deeper darkness gnawed within the heart of the Space Wolves. Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang returned from Terra's shadow with a burden heavier than any war gear. The summons had not been a summons at all, but a trial by whispers, a game of secrets played by faceless masters. The halls of the High Lords had offered no answers, only veiled threats and icy promises. His loyalty was questioned, his honor tested by shadows. As the Stormfang's wrath pierced the warp, Harrick's mind replayed the faces he had seen. Those who called themselves brothers but whispered treason. The Rune Priest spoke of shifting tides and fractured oaths. The Iron Priest murmured of machines faltering under unseen corrosion. Even the wolves themselves, bound by ancient kinship, were not immune to doubt. In the depths of the Fang, Harrick convened a secret council. Those closest to him gathered, Skolder One Eye, Iron Priest Bori Stonehand, and Yorin Thrice Bitten. Their voices were low, words weighted by years of brotherhood and unspoken fears. There are forces beyond our understanding, Skilder warned, tracing glowing runes in the air. The silent wolf watches, not with fangs bared, but with empty eyes. It waits for us to fracture. Jorin's youthful fire bristled. Then we break it first. We show terror that the space wolves still hunt in packs, that we are not prey but hunters. Bori's metallic voice rumbled. Be wary, Jorin. Rage blinds even the sharpest blade. Harrick nodded slowly, the burden of leadership cutting deeper than any blade. Our enemies wear many faces, he said. Some are cloaked in shadow, others wear the Emperor's light. We must discern friend from foe before all is lost. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. The stars, distant and cold, offered no guidance. Harrick looked to the frozen horizon and whispered, The silent wolf is among us, and its bite will tear us apart from within. The storm that had long churned in the hearts of the space wolves at last broke loose across the shattered halls of the Fang. It was not a tempest of wind or snow, but of betrayal, silent, creeping, and lethal. Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang moved through the corridors with the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears pressing upon him. The once unified brotherhood was fraying at the edges, splintered by suspicion and ancient grievances reborn. Allies turned eyes away, friends whispered in shadowed corners, and even the fiercest warriors wore masks of doubt. Among those closest to Harrick, a poison festered. Jorin thrice bitten, once a symbol of youthful vigour and loyalty, had grown restless, his spirit kindled by visions of glory, yet tinged with bitterness. The rune priest, Skjolder One Eye, sensed the shifting tides, his one eye clouded with dread. An iron priest Bori Stonehand, bound by machine and faith, bore scars both visible and unseen, a testament to the fractures within. The catalyst came in the form of a cryptic message intercepted from a hidden cogitator. It spoke of a secret cabal within the Imperium's highest echelons. Those who viewed the space wolves as dangerous relics, to be controlled or destroyed. Worse still, the message hinted that this cabal had infiltrated the Fang itself. The halls echoed with confrontation. Accusations flew sharper than chain blades. Brotherhood was tested against the cold calculus of survival. In a chamber carved from the oldest ice, Harrick faced Jorin, whose defiance burned like a wildfire. You would cast suspicion on your own blood, Harrick growled, his voice heavy with sorrow. Jorin's eyes flared. If the pack is to survive, it must be purged. Better to break than be broken. The tension spiraled into violence, a storm of steel and fury beneath Fenris's twin moons. Brothers clashed, not as hunters united, but as foes torn by fear and ambition. Blood soaked the ancient stones, and the howl of wolves was drowned beneath the thunder of betrayal. As dawn bled over the frostbitten peaks, the Fang lay wounded, its heart bleeding with loss. Harrick stood amid the ruin, the weight of command heavier than ever. The silent wolf had struck, not from without, but from within. And in that shattered dawn, the fate of the space wolves hung by a thread as fragile as the ice beneath their feet. The icy winds howled relentlessly across the broken plains of Fenris, carving scars into the jagged cliffs that surrounded the Fang. The chapter was fractured, its spirit battered by treachery, yet beneath the frost-bitten sky, a slow thaw began to kindle. Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang walked alone along the ancient wolf trails, the path his ancestors had once traversed in times of glory and despair. The blood spilled within his halls weighed heavily on his soul. Yet, amid the ruin, he sought a path forward. a chance to heal the fractures within his pack before their enemies could exploit them. Shoulder One Eye's runes had spoken of a vision, a great shadow descending upon the Imperium, born from the very heart of its power. The silent wolf, once a symbol of Fenrisian strength, now seemed to embody their greatest fear, the slow erosion of loyalty and faith. Harrick knew that survival would demand more than brute force. It required sacrifice, understanding, and the forging of new bonds where old ones had been broken. Returning to the Fang, Harrick called together the survivors, warriors scarred in body and spirit. Among them was Jorin Thrice Bitten, humbled but unbroken, his fire tempered by the harsh lessons of betrayal and loss. "We have walked through darkness," Harrick's voice echoed over the gathered pack. "But the wolf that survives is not the strongest alone, but the one that knows when to trust its pack. Our enemies will seek to tear us apart, but we will stand united, or we will fall divided." Iron Priest Bori Stonehand offered a solemn nod, his mechanical limbs creaking softly as he began the sacred rites of renewal. Blessings for those broken and rites to mend the wounds of both flesh and spirit. Skjoldr chanted low, his rune-carved staff glowing faintly in the frostbitten dusk, weaving ancient protections around the fortress. The ritual was as much for their souls as their bodies, an invocation to the All-Father for strength and guidance. Outside, the storms gathered anew, but inside the Fang, a fragile hope flickered, a promise that even in the coldest winters, the thaw would come. The path ahead was treacherous and uncertain, but the Space Wolves had learned that redemption often walked a frozen trail, harsh, unforgiving, but ultimately leading to survival. The void above the war-torn world of Crixus was a churning tempest of ash and fire, a canvas painted with the blood of fallen fleets and shattered dreams. Beneath this iron sky, the remnants of the once mighty Imperial Armada gathered in grim silence. The shattered remnants of what was once the Crimson Legion formed a fragile bulwark against the encroaching darkness, their resolve tested beyond endurance. Commander Solara Voss stood upon the bridge of the battlecruiser Sable Judgment, her eyes fixed on the hollow projection of the battlefield below. The sprawling cityscape of Crixus was a ruinous wasteland, its towers reduced to skeletal frames and its streets rivers of molten slag. Yet within these ruins, the enemy stirred, shadows that twisted and writhed in the remnants of light. Beside her, Lieutenant Cale Draven tightened his grip on the console, his jaw clenched. They grow bolder. Scouting parties have penetrated deeper than ever before. Solara's voice was steady, but laced with the weight of command. Then we must be sharper. Every patrolman is a blade in this war. As the Sable Judgment prepared to launch its contingent of drop pods, a crackling burst of static interrupted the tense quiet. The Vox operator's face paled as he transmitted a garbled message. Coordinates from a derelict space hulk drifting near Crixus's orbit. "The Oblivion's grasp," Solara whispered. That ancient dreadnought had been lost to the void decades ago, its hull rumored to be cursed, its crew vanished without trace. Orders were swift and unyielding. A boarding party would investigate. What secrets lay dormant in the Oblivion's grasp could turn the tide or doom them all. As the drop pods pierced the planet's smog-choked atmosphere, Solara pondered the cost of war, the fragile thread by which hope hung, and the shadows that dwelled both without and within. Below, the fires burned cold, and the echoes beneath the iron sky whispered of forgotten betrayals and the price of survival. In the labyrinthine underlevels of the Oblivion's grasp, where the walls whispered secrets older than the Imperium itself, Commander Solara Voss led her boarding party through darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow sound itself. Each step echoed faintly, a muted reminder that they were intruders in a tomb not meant to be disturbed. The dreadnought's corridors were scarred by time and war. Scorched bulkheads, flickering servos, and the faint scent of rusted oil mingled with the metallic tang of stale blood. Solara's vox crackled with static, her squad's communications fragmented but persistent. Shadows moved just beyond the edge of her helmet's sensors, and her grip tightened on her plasma carbine. "Stay sharp," she whispered into the comms. "The void has teeth here." Deeper into the vessel, they found the relics of a forgotten horror. War engines reduced to rusting hulks, the frozen corpses of servitors fused to machinery, and data logs fragmented by centuries of silence. Among the ruin, Solara uncovered a cryptic message, etched in a dialect lost to all but the most learned scholars of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The message spoke of a silent dagger, a weapon not of steel or energy, but of treachery and shadow. Her mind raced as she pieced together the implication. This was no mere ghost ship. It was a tomb harboring a secret that could unravel alliances and ignite civil war within the Imperium's fragile bastions. Suddenly, the shadows shifted. A figure emerged, neither fully man nor machine, cloaked in the tattered remnants of a chapter's colors long dead. The figure moved with unnatural grace, its eyes burning with the cold fire of a traitor's soul. "Welcome, Commander," the voice hissed, "to the dagger that will silence the wolf." The boarding party's laser guns flared, but the enemy was already gone. A whisper, a shadow, a promise of betrayal yet to come. Solara's heart thundered. The silent dagger was no myth. It was here, and the hunt had begun. The halls of the Fang echoed with a silence heavy as stone. Wolf Lord Harek Icefang paced the ancient chamber, the weight of his crown pressing upon his brow like the relentless Fenrisian frost. Outside, the storm raged anew, a tempest of ice and shadow that seemed to mirror the turmoil within his heart. Beneath the banners torn by betrayal, the space wolves faced a fracture deeper than any wound of war. The silent whispers of treachery had taken root, poisoning the sacred bond of brotherhood. The pack was divided, loyalty cleaved by suspicion, honor battered by doubt. Jorin thrice bitten, once a fierce warrior ablaze with unyielding loyalty, now stood apart, his eyes shadowed by regret and a silent fury. He had tasted the bitter draught of betrayal, and in his heart burned a question. Could a pack broken from within ever truly heal? Harek's voice broke the silence, low and weary. "We swore an oath, to the Emperor, to Fenris, and to each other. Yet that oath lies shattered. Tell me, brothers, how do we mend what has been broken?" Iron Priest Bori. Stonehand stepped forward, his mechanical limbs creaking softly, the hum of sacred machines blending with his measured tone. "Through sacrifice, Lord Harek, some debts demand payment in blood. Some sins require absolution beyond words." Skjolder One Eye raised his rune-carved staff, the single eye gleaming with ancient wisdom and sorrow. The All-Father watches, even in silence. Redemption is not given freely. It must be earned, forged anew in fire and ice. A murmur rose among the gathered pack, a fragile hope amidst the storm of despair. But beneath their words lurked the unspoken truth. The path to salvation would be steeped in pain, betrayal, and sacrifice. Harek's gaze hardened, resolve stealing against the cold. "We will hunt the shadows within. We will reclaim our honor, or fall as wolves torn apart by their own teeth. The storm outside broke with a howl, shaking the ancient stones of the Fang. And in that tempest, the fractured pack found its battle cry, not of certainty, but of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The waning light of Fenris's twin moons cast long shadows over the snow-swept plains. Wolf, Lord Harrick Icefang, gathered the remnants of his pack beneath the jagged cliffs of the Fang, their breaths misting in the cold air, eyes sharp as the blades they carried. Tonight, the hunt was not for beasts or Xenos, but for the treachery festering within their own ranks. The silent wolf's bite had left wounds unseen but bleeding all the same. Trust was a fragile thread stretched taut, ready to snap with the slightest tremor. Yet the wolves would not break, not while Harrick's blood still ran fierce beneath his armor. Shoulder One Eye whispered ancient runes into the night wind, their power weaving a net of detection and binding. The ritual was both a prayer and a snare, calling forth the spirits of Fenrisian ancestors to aid in revealing the hidden. Jorin Thrice-Bitten moved silently beside Harrick, his face set in grim determination. Redemption had sharpened his senses, but the path was perilous, littered with shadows that could consume even the strongest will. Iron Priest Bori Stonehand monitored their progress with mechanical precision, his augmetic limbs attuned to the faintest anomalies. Heat signatures, warp taint, the subtle distortions of psychic deceit. As the hunt unfolded, the wolves tracked a trail of corrupted whispers and fragmented loyalties, leading them deeper into the forgotten warrens beneath the Fang. Tunnels older than the chapter itself, carved by ancient hands in times when Fenris was wild and unclaimed. There, amid the echoing dark, the wolves confronted their enemy. Not a single foe, but a cabal of shadows. Traitors who had embraced the warp's poison and betrayed their oaths for promises of power and immortality. Steel clashed with darkness as the battle erupted, a storm of fury and faith. The pack fought not just for survival, but for the soul of the chapter itself. When dawn finally bled over the horizon, the silent wolf was vanquished, but not without cost. Blood stained the frozen ground, and the howls of those lost echoed long after the last blow fell. Harrick stood amidst the ruin, the burden of command heavier than ever, knowing the fight was far from over. The wolves had survived the night, but the war for their honor had only just begun. The final battle unfolded beneath a sky torn by storms. Lightning, jagged and fierce, illuminating the battlefield in strobing bursts of cold white and deep purple. The Fang, once a bastion of strength and honor, now stood as the last bulwark against the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume the Imperium's northern reaches. Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang led the remaining Space Wolves with grim resolve, their armor battered, but their spirits unyielding. The enemy was unlike any they had faced before. A legion of corrupted warriors, twisted by the warp's foul embrace and driven by a singular purpose: the annihilation of the pack. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and blood, the clash of bolter fire and howling chainswords a relentless chorus. Around them, the ancient stones of the Fang trembled as titanic forces collided. Old grudges and ancient powers unleashed in a storm of death and defiance. Jorin Thrice-Bitten fought at Harrick's side, his eyes blazing with fury tempered by sorrow. The wounds of betrayal still bled beneath his skin, but in this crucible he had found a new purpose: to defend the legacy of his brothers, even unto death. As the battle reached its crescendo, Harrick faced the twisted figure who had sought to unravel their bond, the silent wolf incarnate. Their duel was a tempest of fury and precision. blades clashing in a dance of light and shadow, honor and treachery. In the final shattering moment, Harrick struck true, the silent wolf falling beneath the weight of his wrath. Yet victory was Pyrrhic. The fang lay in ruin, and the cost had been terrible. As the storm subsided, Harrick looked upon the shattered remnants of his pack, survivors who bore the scars of war and betrayal. He raised his voice, a howl that carried across the frozen wastes, a call to endure, to rebuild, to honor the fallen. "We are the wolves of Fenris," he declared, "and though our path is dark and frozen, we shall rise again. Our pack is broken but not defeated, for the All-Father watches, and in his shadow we are eternal." The last stand was over. The fang was scarred, but its spirit endured, a flame flickering defiantly against the long night. The sky above Fenris was a tapestry of blood and shadow, the dying light of the twin suns bleeding into the endless twilight that now ruled the battered world. The echoes of the last battle still lingered in the air, a haunting dirge of steel and sorrow that settled over the shattered fang like a funeral shroud. Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang stood alone atop the highest spire, his breath misting in the cold air as he gazed out over the desolation. Around him, the ruins of his once proud chapter whispered tales of glory and loss, of loyalty forged and broken. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on his shoulders, yet within him burned an ember of unyielding resolve. The silent wolf's shadow had been cast down, but its venom lingered still. The wounds inflicted by betrayal would not heal quickly, nor without sacrifice. Harrick knew that the survival of the Space Wolves demanded more than strength. It demanded redemption and the willingness to face the darkness within. As the stars emerged in the twilight sky, a messenger approached, bearing a sealed hololith, etched with the seal of the High Lords of Terror. The message was both a summons and a decree. The Space Wolves were to answer for their actions, their loyalty once again questioned by the very empire they had sworn to defend. Harrick's gaze hardened. The path ahead was fraught with peril, a crucible of politics and power where allies could become foes and enemies might wear the mask of friendship. Yet, as the cold wind howled across the spires, he whispered a vow to the fading light. "We are the wolves of Fenris. In shadow or in flame we endure. Our story is not yet finished." The twilight deepened, and with it came the reckoning. A reckoning that would test the pack's unity, their faith, and the very soul of their chapter. The pale light of Fenris's dying twin suns filtered weakly through the swirling mist that cloaked the shattered fang. The world itself seemed to hold its breath, as if mourning the twilight of an age long in the making. The air was thick with the scent of cold steel and fading honor. The echoes of 100 battles whispered in the frozen winds. Wolf Lord Harrick Icefang stood alone upon the highest rampart, the weight of his armor a familiar burden, heavier now with the scars of betrayal and loss. His eyes, once fierce with the fire of youth, now carried the somber weight of a legacy battered by time and treachery. The fang below was a ruin, a tomb of shattered brotherhood and broken oaths. He raised his gaze to the vast expanse of stars above, those ancient sentinels that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the births of gods, and the deaths of heroes. In their cold light, Harrick felt the terrible truth of immortality. To endure is to suffer, to watch all you hold dear slip through your grasp like smoke in the void. Behind him, the last surviving pack gathered, warriors marked by battle and betrayal, their faces grim but unyielding. Among them stood Jorin Thrice-Bitten, a man tempered by fire and regret, a living testament to the cost of redemption. Harrick's voice broke the silence, low and resonant, a howl carried on the wind. We are the wolves of Fenris. Our claws may be broken, our pack shattered, but our spirit remains unbroken. In the face of oblivion we stand. In the shadow of the silent wolf, we howl. The warriors raised their voices in a chorus that shook the very foundations of their world. A mournful, defiant howl that echoed across the frozen wastes. A promise that even in death, the wolf's cry would never be silenced. As the twin suns sank below the horizon, their light extinguished forever, the fang was left in darkness. But in that darkness burned a fierce, undying flame. The legacy of the space wolves was not ended. It was transformed, forged, anew in sacrifice and sorrow. And so the last howl echoed into the night, a final testament to the cost of immortality, the price of betrayal, and the unyielding heart of a wolf who refuses to die.